Um, okay, somebody can, you can screen record. I don't care. Whatever. I think you guys are going to, is it me? Who's recording this? Is somebody recording it and it's
Julie is
telling
recording
me?
currently.
Oh, okay.
Although
That's
Julie
fine.
is muted
Thank
and
you.
has your camera off.
I like your tapestry on the wall.
Oh, it's not mine. I think it's my girlfriend's roommate's.
Oh, okay.
Not much of a tapestry guy.
I was say that matches your personality very well, Daniel, but if it's your girlfriend's, then that's okay.
Yeah.
Cool. So, yeah, I think I can make a case for why Martin Shrkeli didn't do anything wrong, and the media's reaction to him was strictly based on political gain. Hundreds of thousands of people do the same exact thing that he was accused of, and don't have their faces shown, don't have their names shown, and pretty much every medication, it's overpriced. Like, for example, many of us have been to the hospital where they charge us $80 for an Advil. This is something that goes on in hospitals with medication because of how insurance works, because they know that insurance will cover a lot of the cost, so they can jack it up as high as possible. So I don't know how you guys feel about insurance. It didn't exist until the late 60s. So I think a lot of you are pretty pro health, free healthcare, which I'm not necessarily against. I just think that you need to have a very small country or a very closed country in order to have free healthcare, but I think that's the way things are going to be going. So I think we can probably agree on that. Joel, why are you making that face? Okay, I don't know if I'm like the only person talking here.
Yeah, I'd love to see some more faces, some more input.
See, I'm fine with you guys being here. Julie wants to kick you guys. We might disagree on things, but I'm perfectly fine with you guys in being included in meetings. So even if you disrupt,
This is the marketplace of ideas.
Yeah, exactly. Dave Rubin style. The free marketplace of ideas.
This is John Mills.
We always say, vibing is what we're doing. So nothing.
And I don't have anything against you guys personally. I'm leaving ASU after this semester, so I don't care about, personally, me, I don't care about your elections. I don't care about your political. I really have no input. It doesn't affect me at all. So I have nothing against you guys. As long as you guys aren't disruptive, I'm perfectly fine with you being here. So.
Can I ask a question, please?
Yes, whoever, I don't know who said that.
It's me. I'm Bridget.
Oh, hi, Bridget.
So I know you said you weren't interested in our election or anything, but is there a possibility at the end of this, you guys could we could ask some questions, because there's been some controversy over us not being inclusive or not reaching out to certain groups. So, we just want to know, is there anything that we can do for you guys that would maybe change your mind about how you feel about us, and, anything along those lines, because we really don't want to be seen as an exclusive group. So you guys have any ideas or anything?
Oh, well, I love you saying that. That actually brings a tear to my eye. That's really sweet. Again, for me personally, I'm open to hearing a lot of your ideas, and I think we would agree on more things than you would expect. With the other members of the group, I can't speak for them. They're not really on right now. So for me personally, I don't know what the voting process is, so I don't know if I'm going to vote either way, because I'm leaving after I've already done school pretty much, so I don't care. But when it comes to your ideas and what you want for ASU, whatever elections there are, I would love to have a discussion about what you plan and whatever else. So I'm totally down to having any type of conversation about that. So yeah, if anyone else wants to contribute. Julie, I'm not throwing you under the bus. Okay, she wants me to get started. Okay.
You kind of threw her under the bus.
I'm just saying, I'm not speaking for any other members. That's all I'm saying. I'm not going to do that. So
give the Pharma Bro presentation.
Yes, of course. So let me get this set up. I'm not really familiar with Zoom, so I'm trying to get it all set up. So the reason for this presentation is because Martin Shrkeli is someone who has been affected by the media for about 5 years. Since August of 2015 was when his name was first thrown out there. Before that, he was significantly unknown to the public. I mean, among hedge funds and pharmaceuticals, he was probably well known, but not among regular people like you or I. And this has to do with the media itself and why it targets certain people, the crimes that he was accused of committing, and what he was, how the Daraprim issue was construed by the media, and why it wasn't thoroughly explained, and why it has to do with other problems in our nation's healthcare system besides just one company. And also just him as a person, and also his trial and why he's in prison for 7 years, and we're going to get into that. And this presentation is not really huge. I made it today within like an hour, so it's not amazing, but I know a lot of it's from memory because I've been a fan of Martin Shrkeli probably since 2016, since I was around 15, 16 years old. So you guys can remember, I don't care. Since I was around 16 years old, so this is something I'm fairly passionate about. And he's recently been in the media because he wants to be released for a bit, or at least having not like still in prison, but having more freedom, because he wants to look into a vaccine for coronavirus, since he's familiar with pharmaceuticals, especially rare disease, and he knows all about chemistry and health and all that stuff. So he's trying to get out to do that, and if it is possible, he could help us find a cure. So I'm gonna get my screen recording started if I can figure this out. Okay. I know how to do this. I haven't. Does anyone know how you get to screen record on here?
There's something that says share content.
Share screen. Share screen.
It's usually at the bottom.
The bottom, okay.
Yeah, if you're on a computer, it's like the big green arrow.
Share, okay, thank
right
you
next to the
guys.
participants button.
Okay, so
Yes, at the bottom.
so you guys are going to see yourselves for a second. Perfect. And I'm using a Chromebook because my MacBook isn't the best. All right, so can you guys see everything?
Yes, it's perfect.
All right, cool.
Looks good to me.
Awesome. So, free Martin Shrkeli. Here's some pictures of him, a cute little collage. So to get started, Martin Shrkeli was born March 17th, 1983 in Brooklyn, New York. He considers himself a New Yorker. That's where he's lived his whole life. He doesn't even have a driver's license because you don't really need it in New York. He's a first-generation Albanian immigrant. Both of his parents were janitors and didn't even speak English when they came here. He has a few siblings, but they're not really public because he obviously doesn't want to put his family out there. Despite his parents' financial struggles and language barrier, Martin was ambitious from a young age. So he started playing chess in elementary school with an older neighbor who was very familiar with biotech and companies and all that, and he taught him about stocks. He's also a really excellent chess player, which obviously chess is a very mental game. So if you're 7 years old playing chess, you're kind of already, you're intelligent. He bought his first shares at age 12 and continued throughout his teen years, including Amazon at 15. So that would have been 1997. He was investing in Amazon, which definitely would have paid big. So there's speculation about whether he graduated Hunter High School, because he did donate $1 million once he became very successful. He donated $1 million to his high school. Some people say that he did graduate. Some people say he didn't, where he had a degree with college. So they don't really know exactly what happened, but regardless, he did attend that high school. And he began interning for Kramer, Berkowitz & Co., which is Kramer's the guy who does the Mad Money show, if you're familiar. That was his company. And at age 17, he began interning there. So after his internship at Kramer Berkowitz, Shrkeli worked as a financial analyst. So he started kind of going up in the big leagues there. In 2006, he started his own hedge fund, Alea Capital Management. 3 years later, co-founded MSMB Capital Management. And this is what I want to acknowledge. Again, I could get into the details of his companies before. I don't think they're really relevant. I think we know how hedge fund works. Hedge funds are simply people invest their money, or they give their money to this company, and they expect them to get the maximum amount of returns with, so it's basically somebody giving you your money to put it in the stock market. So this is a very, there's nothing really inspiring about that. You're kind of just playing with money. You're kind of just gambling. It's glorified gambling. And Martin had a kind of a moral dilemma about that, because he made a ton of money, and he actually had an experience where his sister developed a health problem where she wasn't recovering. So it made him very interested in healthcare and medicine. And because of that, in 2011, he founded Retrofin, which is a biotechnology company designed to find medications for rare diseases. And that's what he focused on, was rare diseases. And there's a big difference between rare diseases and medication for rare diseases and medications for heart problems, like common illnesses. Viagra, for example, is sold relatively cheap because so many people buy it. And I think we can understand that concept. He had a drug called Thiola, which is a cystinuria drug, which it's considered a rare illness. 1 in 2,000 means a rare illness, and this has 1 in 7,000 people. So the price hike was $150 to $30, which wasn't as significant as Daraprim, which we'll mention later. But as you can tell, this is still a dramatic price hike. And the justification of this is not necessarily, oh, let's just hike it up for money. Obviously, profits are involved because it's a company, but it's because these rare drugs don't generate the same profits that Viagra does, or that any other common medication does. So in order for it to be sustained, and in order to keep making it, because in the US we have so many regulations on drugs that it's pretty impossible to get something started without huge amounts of capital, and in order to test it and all of that. It takes years to test drugs. And that's why rare diseases get ignored, because, so let's say you're someone with a disease that affects 1 in 10,000 people, it gets ignored because the amount of capital it takes to invest in that drug, it's not worth it. So a lot of these drugs actually don't exist anymore because the companies that own them don't have an incentive to, and the need for a generic isn't there. And the cost of $30 a pill is mostly paid for by insurance, like we said, so that's why it's able to get hyped up that much, and it's not always affecting the person. There are cases, which I will get into later, where somebody doesn't have insurance, but in a lot of cases, if somebody has a illness like this, and this is an immune issue, or it's inherited, it's a genetic disorder. So people probably know from a young age that they have it, and they can have insurance in place. All right. So the next business was Turing Pharmaceuticals, named after Alan Turing. So he founded this business in 2015, and this was the whole controversy that was in the media, which was the drug Daraprim. So it is a drug to treat malaria and toxoplasmosis. It was purchased for $55 million from another business. So the other business was going to stop making drugs, like I mentioned, because it wasn't making a lot of money. Malaria, again, isn't super common, especially in the United States, and toxoplasmosis is very rare as well. It can be a side effect from AIDS, which is why they said this was an AIDS drug. It wasn't an AIDS drug, it was a drug for a side effect that can occur from AIDS. And they purchased this because it was Daraprim wouldn't exist, and there wasn't a generic alternative. So that's when the price was raised from $1,350 to $750, which sounds extreme. And it's concerning if you think somebody is just pocketing that extra, the profits from that. However, like I said, the incentive of this was it was going to go out of business. And this drug is so rarely used that there is really no profits from it compared to a drug like Viagra, compared to a drug that is much more common. So the $750 is not paid for by the people who are using it. And Martin Shrkeli made sure of this. He would pay, let's say somebody didn't have insurance, they could contact him. He would pay for the full drug. No questions asked. However, most of these instances were paid for by insurance companies, and then those profits would be used. The company Turing focused on finding medications and cures for rare diseases. So that's where the money, obviously there was a profit involved. Martin Shkreli's a millionaire, but that money was going into helping people who have these diseases that are being ignored by very rich, very wealthy companies that don't have an incentive to invest in them. So he was subpoenaed by a committee that was with the U.S. House of Representatives to investigate the price heist. So you probably see a video or screenshots of him testifying. And he says, like, I plead the fifth, I plead the fifth. It was kind of a meme at the time. He was arrested December 2015 for securities fraud. 8 counts were presented, and he was found guilty of only 3 in August 2017. Now, the 3 counts were 2 securities frauds and 1 conspiracy to commit securities fraud. I mean, using the very key part of this is that, one, they had the core, or the whole what's the word? I'm sorry, I'm blinking right now. The whole jury was very biased because they were in New York. All of this went down a year before. His name was plastered everywhere. He was considered, celebrities were saying they wanted to punch him in the face because they didn't like how he looked. He was incredibly tarnished his reputation. And so how do you pick a jury in a city, like this? It took a long time to find an unbiased jury, and I need to put quotations around unbiased because they all knew who he was. So that definitely tampers with the ability to look at, okay, what's the deal here? With the securities fraud, the companies and the people that he was claimed to lie to all made money. And that's the thing. Technically, it could still be considered a crime. However, if you look at the amount of fraud that goes on in these industries, it doesn't make sense that he would be the one that's targeted when you see this all the time. And I'm going to get into this a bit more later. And if he was charged with all 3 counts later, because he was on bail at the time, he would have only, at max, 1.5 years in prison, which was unlikely. People were predicting that was unlikely. His lawyer was too. He had one of the best lawyers in the country. He was suspected to only have to pay a huge fine, but a fine nonetheless. And we'll see how that kind of went changed direction. So in September, he posted this Facebook post because he had a pretty large following on Facebook, and he said, "The Clinton Foundation is willing to protect its secrets. So on HRC's book tour, try to grab a hair from her. I must confirm the sequences I have. We'll pay $5,000 per hair obtained from Hillary Clinton. Payment after the security matches. Good luck, patrollers." Now, this is obviously incredibly stupid to post. However, it obviously was a joke around this post following him, and he was being followed by the FBI. And so before this happened, when he was free, he was being consistently followed by the FBI, which was concerning to him because considering, he paid his, dues, he's on bail, whatever. But this is the straw that broke the camel's back. Just a silly. And there's a picture. It's just, and he's in his apartment just being silly. So Judge, I'm probably going to pronounce wrong, Kyo Atsumoto revoked Shkreli's bail on September 13th, 2017, and he was sentenced to 7 years in federal prison. Like I said, the original guess and the prediction for what people usually get for this charge is around 1.5 years, maybe 2 years at most, and he was sentenced to 7 years. Originally, he was served at a maximum security prison, which had rapists and murderers. Usually when white-collar crime like this, they tend to go to a different prison because of the severity of the crime. And now he's in FCC Allenwood, which is in Pennsylvania. And write him letters. You can go to this here, if you're very interested. But I don't think anyone who's watching is very interested in writing him a letter. All right. So this is my main point, is the media slam. Again, I don't have much info here because I really was short on time. But here's just the difference. His face was included in all of these. His name was included. Here we have an article by the New York Times discussing asthma and medication, so inhalers mostly, and how expensive they are based on price hikes. No name of a company, no face, and this is in dozens of articles. Here's the EpiPen that's had a significant, a few years ago, they had Shrkeli to talk about it, but this was a huge deal that they were talking about at the time for EpiPens, which is something more common. Many in America, I think a good amount of people have an allergy. I personally, I have an allergy and an EpiPen. A lot of people need EpiPens compared to something like Daraprim, which again, it was a very small amount of people who needed the drug. No face here, no name. It says the name of the company, but no one's being thrown over the bus, and they hiked their prices over 400%. And as you can see this many times, Martin Shrkeli symptoms a dangerous system. Why was he the only person who has their face like this? Their face used, their name used. This was what was really confusing. Again, I think a lot of it was based on how he looked. He has kind of a, just his personality. And usually when somebody goes through something, they do a whole apology tour. I'm sorry, I did something wrong. I apologize. I'm going to take the price down. He didn't do that, and that's his own prerogative. If he did do that, he probably would not be in jail for 7 years right now. But because of all this, he developed a cult of personality. He gained a huge following and had influence. So the whole Wu-Tang album, which you're probably familiar with, he bought the album Once Upon a Time in Sheldon, and he bought it in Square. It was on sale. He bought it. It was very expensive. I forget the exact number, but a few million. And people were mad about him taking that. He would taunt rappers. That was a video. Here's a video he did to Ghostface Killah, who said some things about him. Here's him. He was very interested in doing YouTube streams where he would talk about everything from chemistry to finance, stocks, and he actually helped a lot of people. I know people personally who said they used his videos when they were in chemistry in school because he would talk about those things. There's him with his cat Trashy. And here's him with Miley Annapolis. So he has some traction with right-wing circles too. So that's the end. I didn't add anything else, so I will exit this out here. Trying to think if there's anything else I wanted to add. Simply that's it. I'll go back to the Zoom now. Right. Okay, so anyone have any questions? That was it. So anyone have any questions? I thank you guys for being so patient and listening. I really appreciate it.
Right, what needs to change so we don't have any more victims like Martin Shrkeli?
What needs to change is I think we have a huge issue with the healthcare system itself. And like I said, I think that, again, I'm not entirely against socialized medicine. This is something that's going to, people don't like hearing that. I think that obviously the issue comes into play when there is this supply and demand. Like the biggest issue here is that it was a rare drug. And when you see numbers like that, you compare it to something like a drug that you get all the time. Like, let's say it's an antihistamine or an inhaler, which are still are pricey. But we need to understand that which direction do you want to go. And I think that when people do have insurance, the problem is that they raise the prices way too high because they're like, oh, well, the insurance company's going to pay for it. And that's not a very healthy way to have the system because, again, if somebody doesn't have insurance, then what do? If somebody, like, let's say somebody does have this rare disease, what are they going to do? And luckily, Martin himself would pay for the drug for people, but I don't think companies do that, especially bigger ones that don't have the incentive to appease people. So again, I'm not an expert on this. I don't know what the solution is. I think our healthcare system does need to change. And always going to have people trying to exploit it for capital gain. But I think that Martin is an example where he didn't necessarily, that wasn't the only reason he did that, because you can see he was involved in hedge fund in financial investment and all that stuff. And he was making millions doing that. So if he only cared about money, he wouldn't have changed the direction to pharmaceuticals, because look at where that took him. his passion was about rare diseases. If somebody wants money, they're going to invest in a company that are in diseases that have much more a demand for. Like that's why you so many, like I said, erectile dysfunction pills, because there's a huge demand for it. So I think that's kind of the point. What was that?
Sorry, I was just stuck with my mom.
That's okay.
Yeah.
But why was he charging $1,000 for EpiPens in the first place?
That he wasn't doing the EpiPens. He was doing this medication called Daraprim, which treats malaria in some cases, and toxoplasmosis, which is a side effect of AIDS. However, it's very rarely used. It was less than 1,000 people used it per year. So when you have, in America, compared to other countries, we have a lot of red tape when it comes to medications. You have to do a lot of testing. You have to do a lot of, it caused a lot of cost. So the drug was actually going to go out of business. So his company bought the drug for $55 million because there was no generic alternative. So the 1,000 people who needed that drug, they wouldn't have had a drug if it wasn't for Turing purchasing the medication.
Oh,
so
also,
by them, yeah.
He didn't go to jail for anything revolving the price gouging. It was all about defrauding his investors. So it's really not even.
Yeah, but again, I'm making the claim, and I think a lot of people make the claim that if the media didn't do this, he wouldn't have even, the securities, they wouldn't have even investigated. This is something that happens so frequently that he had a witch hunt because of this, and because of his political leanings too, that put a focus on him. And this stuff happens all the time with, there's so much corruption with these kind of industries. And again, like I said, the people that the fraud was against or whatever, they didn't even testify against him. They made money. So they were saying, we made money. Again, it's not right to technically lie about it, but people ended up making money on, so that's, and I say, technically, what the heck? Sorry, I'm something else. Technically, he did something wrong, but sometimes you can kind of see the big picture and what it means. So, the parasite, yes,
That's
it is
why
a
we need
parasite.
state-run media.
The media. You support state-run media. Don't you believe that there is a issue there when it comes to, people in power influencing that?
If I could add
that's already what happens, though. People with power influence media currently. It's just people.
No, I totally agree with. I agree with that, but it doesn't allow any other opinions.
Yeah, I was just gonna say it's already like state-run now.
Well, these
In
governments
America, 90% of the media is controlled by just 6 corporations, all who have very strongly vested interests.
Yep.
Yeah, and then if the media was state-run, you could theoretically hold it accountable democratically, right? And you could hold your elected officials accountable.
But even look at other things like Google and YouTube, for example, that actually do get taxpayer money on top of it. So yeah, they are accountable in that way when you really look into it that way. They are, in that sense, responsible in a way. So either they have to give up their corporate welfare, or they actually have to start enforcing their freedom of speech.
They would only be accountable if they could. They would only be accountable if they couldn't profit without the money from the government, which I don't know if that's the case for Google, but I mean, considering how much ad revenue they make, I would doubt that.
Oh yeah, and they perform an invaluable service to government, right? Because they're private corporations, so they have leverage over the government. It's not the other way around. We're paying them for like surveillance, ad revenue, the tech, military, industrial complex relationship, right? We're not giving them money for something that they need from us. Rather, we need something from them.
Yeah, and that's
the only solution to that
yeah.
is nationalization.
Yeah, well, that's the other thing also, is our military industrial complex right now is largely that. Now, not saying this in like an anti-military way. Your average, soldiers who go to the militaries. Yeah, your average soldiers who go to the military, they have good intentions, not necessarily talking ill of them or even what the military does, but like the complex, the core of it. At the top level, just like anything else, they're corrupt to the core. Just look at, for example, not too recently, was not too long ago. Sorry, it was a bit before I was born. But yeah, NATO, for example, illegally bombing the Balkans, which my family knows firsthand.
Wait, what country are you from, Stefan?
I'm from America.
Okay, well, I mean, what country is your family from?
That's a microaggression.
that's institutional racism.
I'm Albanian, so from similar countries, our families are.
Yeah, interestingly, yeah, we're Serbian.
Oh, ooh.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Yeah.
We can't be friends anymore.
No, we can't. No. But that's just one example. It's just like with anything at the top levels, you are very, very, very much likely to see a lot of this corruption. But your average people going into the military, I'm not saying the military is bad or anything.
It targets poor people. Yeah. It targets minorities and poor people.
Right.
And
well, yeah.
That's what's corrupt about it. And the people who are ordering the wars are the ones going and fighting and having, one of my, unfortunately, this is personal, but one of my friends I wasn't super close to, this weekend he committed suicide.
Oh.
He had PTSD from being in the military. So this is something that's real. Yeah, it's real, and it's very unfortunate.
Yeah.
So I really do hope the people who are ordering this accountable when there hasn't been any significant, change in the Middle East, or our intentions for going there weren't justified in any reasonable way. So yeah.
Yeah. So that's one thing also is, yeah, even look at what's going on currently, we have this whole now it's not going to last for too much longer. It's been like 3 months now. How's it? Not 3 months. Wait, it started in about 3 months. It was like in February when it really started. So most of February, and then March, of course. Now April, we're getting into it. They're not going to keep it closed till May or June or something like that. It's going to be kind of a bad move on their part, with all the governments, if we keep ourselves shut down for so long,
Wait, how is that related to the topic at hand?
It's from how at the top levels, our rulers are corrupted to the core. But yeah, it's getting a bit sidetracked. Yeah.
Daniel, Alexia, what is your opinion on the shutdown? What do you think is the best solution?
I'm sorry, I was not paying attention too well. What was the shutdown?
The shutdown for coronavirus and the actions. What do you think what we're doing is correct, at least in Arizona or whatever, in the country entirely, or what direction do you think we should take from it?
Well,
I don't think golf should be an essential service.
You don't think, what was that? Sorry.
Sorry, go ahead, Alexia.
Oh, no, it's all right. I was just going to say, I think that right now what the state has done and what it's doing is very inadequate. So like Governor Ducey shutting down things at the very last minute, and Donald Trump, denying it in the beginning, saying it was a hoax, and then very, much later on being like, oh yeah, this is a thing, this is serious, but it was very, very last minute. And if had it been something that was prioritized sooner, I think that we could have avoided a lot of deaths. Also right now, nationalization would be very helpful in terms of with the ventilators that they have for the people who have coronavirus. Those are
I've got one thing to say.
A pop. So that's Trump. Very.
Don't interrupt people.
I mean, it's all good, but that's all I was saying is just the ventilators and stuff are very expensive. And I do if I were to look at an ideal response for the coronavirus, because it's such a crazy epidemic, I would look at China, Vietnam, Cuba, other countries that have done a pretty good job in sort of their nationalization, and sort of just trying to double down on the virus before it really got out of control.
The thing with Cuba also, go ahead. Sorry.
To kind of echo that, we're kind of
I agree with what Alexia said, and I think that the response from the United States to its citizens is inadequate. I don't think enough preparation was done in time, and I don't think the government is providing enough services for the poor and the sick who are in who are the worst affected by this crisis. And this is more of a minor sticking point, but I mean, for some reason in Arizona, Governor Doug Ducey put golf as an essential service. And, you know, I actually used to work at a golf course, and there was nothing essential about what we were doing. So I don't know. I don't know why that's in his executive order.
Well, yeah, I mean, realistically asking like what our recommendation is for the shutdown or what our thoughts are about it, it's like asking like what are my recommendations for putting out a fire in like a tinderbox. You know what I mean? It's like the system.
I'm just curious of where you stand because I'm not familiar with your
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, we need a.
Where I stand on the left.
Fuck you, Holden. I'm trying to talk.
Sorry.
We need a political system like China or Vietnam or Cuba that is more adequately prepared for these kind of crises.
But China and Cuba and all those places, first of all, we don't actually know anything of what they're telling us is accurate. For example, in China, they say that the cases are, you know, a lot lower. Well, how do we know what it is? They've been caught lying to us, you know, time and time again. But then also,
yeah, but we don't know that it's not accurate. You can't just make claims off an absence of evidence. An absence of evidence is not evidence, buddy.
But then also what you look at also is what about the other things like you should be very suspicious, especially considering other things that we've heard from those countries where, like, for example, in their medical system, if you're the average person, it's almost impossible to get an aspirin, and only the best care in the world you can get in Cuba is if you're like a high level official in the government. You don't get good health care over there. They make less than 1% of American doctors. And to add on to what was the other?
Wait, no, their healthcare, like all their healthcare metrics are equivalent to ours, like maternal mortality rate and things like that.
Yeah, hold on. You said how you think that the government isn't providing enough. What's the word?
Services.
Aid, right? Yeah. Okay. So
yes, I think that for workers who are unemployed or affected by this crisis should be entitled to paid leave.
Well, yeah, that's the unemployment rate's got skyrocketed, obviously, but then also that's another thing where you see not just with Trump, but then even beforehand, it's just government. That's just the way it is. But even before with another pandemic, I forget what it was with what was his name? Yeah, it was Obama. I think it was Obama, or might have been someone else, but they didn't restock up on, I think it was surgical masks, despite being told to do so with the stockpile. Because we have because kind of like we have with the the oil reserves, we have a certain amount of oils in our reserves right now in America. Various countries do also, but we also have reserves for medical equipment. Also, he didn't restock up on it despite being, you know, told to do so. And even so, look at other government institutions, like for example the U.S. Postal Service, which lost millions of dollars in revenue and stuff of people's stuff and doesn't get it in on time. That's why today you see the them being outcompeted by people like FedEx, UPS, and stuff like that. So that's what we see with government when government forces people to do something and tells them what to do here. Then what'll happen is it'll ultimately fail, because kind of like how that's one of the biggest issues with socialized medicine, for example. It's because they decide, okay, what's important, what isn't important. Like the NHS, for example, there isn't a week that goes by where the NHS, for example, isn't about to collapse. Or even in Germany, I've heard a lot of my high school professor, for example, talked about Germany's got good healthcare, for example. A lot of their health insurance is paid for by your employer, just the way it is here, even here in America, or even in France for that matter. It's very similar to how we have it here. So if we don't have, if you had more of the market, it would adapt better to changes. Now, I'm not saying it would be, you know, perfect. No system would be perfect, but we should be trying to improve it as opposed to having the government have too much overreach, because then it's like, would the government really handle it better? I would say no, but what would you say?
Well, yeah, what you need to do is you need to take power away from the existing deep state of unelected bureaucrats that currently exists to manage the system of finance, capital, and put that in the hands of the people, so that government just becomes us. You know what I mean? Just guys, you know, hanging out and doing their thing. You know what I mean? Instead of some random asshole in Prague telling you what to do.
I think a government accountable to the people could do the best at providing social services when the government is the people and therefore is accountable to their needs.
Right. Well, I'm not saying necessarily that, you know, we shouldn't be focusing on other people, but there's a whole nother thing we could talk about, just government alone. But specifically with this, that's what we have the markets for. For example, look at, you know, these companies. I'm not necessarily attributing so much altruism to, you know, these multi-million-dollar corporations or anything, but look at other companies, like, for example, what was it? I think it was it was some Italian company that shifted from making like clothing to making facial protections, so that you wouldn't, you know, if people coughed on you, you would have facial protection, like face masks, stuff like that.
Yeah, but again, the political system, like in China, the party just says, "Oh, you make face masks now. You don't have to wait for the, you know, benefactors to, oh, our gracious overlords over there at the Zara factory and their floating sweatshops.
But
they make face masks now, and so we have to be grateful."
But that's what I would advocate. That's what I'm arguing, is that government is, how do we know, for example, that that's happening? And also, how would government be telling us? That's the other thing. It's kind of
we
like
are the government. That's the whole point.
Yeah, but
to make that distinction in your brain. You have to be like, oh, well, one thing is democratically accountable, and the other one's just like, some guy.
I mean, you see, like government, like I see how you're separating government and yourself. And that's all good and dandy, because that's how things are right now. So technically, you know, the government is not us. So, I mean, like, I can just tell by like what you're saying. You have that separation already in your mind, but the government should be us, if that makes any sense.
Rich, who said that that's not National Socialism? What? The chat?
Yeah, let's not just call anyone you disagree with a Nazi. That's pretty rough.
Yeah, come on. Yeah. Whoever wrote that was, a bit too far.
I don't know who's saying. I don't know which side the person. I don't know who they were directing that to. The chat's a problem because you don't know who's saying what to who.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So I've got a question. You guys were saying that the U.S. didn't take measures soon enough, and that, you know, they were just kind of saying it wasn't anything bad. So what did you guys think about when Trump was pushing to cut all travel from China, and not wanting people to go to the hotspots where travelers come from?
Well, what he didn't do was he didn't get enough testing kits for Americans and for the people in America.
Right, but would we have needed it if they didn't have anyone, like Russia, for example, who?
Well, I think again,
process?
I think the misconception here is that immigration controls are like a proper restraint for like viral pathogen contagions. It's not like a real thing. For example, the vast majority of the transmissions we got in the United States are from Europe. And again, you're Americans overseas, right? I mean, even if you shut down all immigration, you can't just tell American citizens they have to hang out wherever they decided to be on, you know, March 10th, right? Those people are going to come back, they're going to transmit the disease. You have shipping, you have produce that gets shipped over from overseas, right? That isn't going to stop. We have
right. Well, yeah, but
they're going to come in and spread this disease. I mean, it's
but you understand what I'm saying, though. You understand what I'm saying, though, right? Is that we tried to take measures. We tried to take measures, and those were shot down because they were.
Well, they weren't shot down. The China ban went in pretty early, actually.
Not as early as was being tried to.
The problem is that the measures we took, instead of taking like measures recommended by like health officials, we just went straight for like immigration controls. Right.
Well,
that's
like well, I mean, it's
like my house is on fire, and it's like, well, dude, I turned on my kitchen sink. Like, I took some measures. It's like,
well, you know, it's a pathogen,
yeah.
so it stays on people the longest. You know, if you're shipping something across, you know, overseas.
Not necessarily. No, it can stay on. Like, for example, fruits and like vegetables.
Right. It stays on there for like, you know, 48 hours or something.
No, anywhere from 3 days to 2 weeks, depending on what you're transporting. Right.
Yeah, but that's whether or not it's at really low temperatures, which most of that stuff isn't. It's not like below, you know.
Refrigerated trucks.
All around the United States. It's not freezing. It's
refrigerated trucks are literally freezers.
No, I know, but you know, some of the stuff you're saying.
Like meat, like for example, we have a lot of agricultural workers in California. A lot of agricultural workers in California, right? I mean, when all those people come back.
Look, I understand what you're saying.
Valley, virus travels around. People pack goods of the food in California.
Yeah, I understand. We're not getting meat from China, though. I don't think.
Well, no, but when people come back from their vacation, like for example, there are a lot of rich people who, when the shutdown started, they flew to their vacation homes on the beach.
Right. Yeah.
And those places became coronavirus hotspots. You have like the random bumfuck towns in Ohio where like 100 people live there, and they have 50 cases of coronavirus because the 50 rich people who decided to fly to their vacation homes out there, their mansions, all have coronavirus, right? Like that is how internal spread happens. And there's no immigration control in the world that prevents that, right? Unless you're literally shooting people that try to come into your country and like hunting people down that were on vacation. I mean, hey, I don't want to plug the USG ticket, but there was a bunch of those undergraduate student government executives who were in Spain like 3 weeks ago. I mean, Donald Trump didn't tell them to stay their asses in Spain, right? They came back. I mean, they probably spread coronavirus around, right?
Well, I know someone whose niece was in Italy for a school thing, and they had to be in quarantine for 2 weeks in their home. Like, this is before they did the show. This was back in, like, late February.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I personally self-quarantined for about 19 days when I got back from California. I think it was like early March. And I, because some of my family members weren't taken seriously, I probably got coronavirus. I was sick for like almost 2 weeks.
They shut down California completely after that thing. Yeah, it's a bit suspicious, kind of, because it's like, why didn't they do this? You know, the government. Why don't they do this every single year when there's a flu outbreak that kills hundreds of thousands of people just in America alone?
Because the reason why coronavirus is dangerous is because it's like all at once and it can overwhelm our medical capacities, right? The flu is, let's say an extreme measure is like 70,000 deaths. It's spread out over an entire year.
All across the country.
All across the country. If that was 70,000 people all getting the flu at the exact same 2 weeks in the exact same area, then yeah, that'd be like a really big problem. But because we have the flu shot, there's herd immunity, so it prevents the overwhelming of medical supplies, right?
Yeah, but it's gonna be a bit interesting coming back even after this, because I mean, it's not necessarily like gonna be gone, but how we have to move on at some point. So yeah, we're gonna have to do something.
Well, you're right. It could become like new normal, like how when cars first became a thing. And they're like, oh, streets are for cars now. If you get run over, that's your fault. It could just become new normal, where it's like every 2 years, coronavirus comes around and we do our thing and no one really does it. If you get coronavirus, you're just fucked.
But even so, like, look at the plague, for example. It was just kind of like a one-time thing. It killed a lot of people. And this isn't even to the back in this 1500s, stuff like that.
Are you minimizing the plague?
No. What I'm saying is, though, that one thing, it was pretty big, all things considering, when you're looking at how many people died and all that stuff. And yeah, it was just a one-time thing. With this, however, I mean, the plague still occurs. It's just like very little.
We have immunity because our ancestors survived through it, so they built up the immunity because they had certain genes or whatever. So now the population is pretty immune to it. So that just naturally happens.
Plus, you have also better hygiene and stuff like that, obviously. So right now, I mean, China even did pretty good work as to actually getting rid of, I think they banned, eating bats and all these kind of.
Oh, they banned exotic animal markets for a couple months.
Yeah, but then again, how long will it be till they reinstate that, if they do reinstate it at all? How long will it be, when I don't know, before all of this goes back to being normal? And then who knows if we have another outbreak of something.
Well, the animal market's like whatever, because saying this came from bat soup is about as realistic as saying it came from 5G. I mean, there's no real conclusive evidence to support that conclusion.
But it's a bit. I mean, we can't necessarily deny that certain things that they do. I mean, think of it. China has they haven't been. I think they do have still the highest population in the world. They haven't whatsoever. They haven't had any. Yeah. What? Yeah. Okay. Sorry, just heard that. Yeah. But right now in China, I mean, they have the largest population in the world, and considering how much, not just the U.S., because it's not that they have necessarily better technology. It's just that a lot of our manufacturing plants are over there. That's even what Trump was talking about when he wanted to bring a lot of those jobs back to America.
Orange man, bad.
Big true.
Yeah. But yeah, that's one thing he was talking about also. But one other thing that was a bit interesting to see is what they do. You can easily look up videos of people eating bats while they're still alive, or even octopus.
Bro, you ever eaten snake?
No.
I've ate rattlesnake here in Arizona.
That's pretty
I
gross.
actually believe that Kobe Bryant is still alive.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe Elvis is too.
I was actually in California when that happened, and I was like, "Who the fuck's Kobe Bryant?"
Personally, I think Tupac Shakur is alive.
Thank you for that input, Joe from Family Guy.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think wasn't Tupac black? You know, despite making up 13% of the population, they commit over half the crimes.
Ooh, I'm glad Julie's.
That's a racist dog whistle.
Ew.
Look at Holden right here. That's a racist dog whistle.
Wait, are you that guy
Thank
who's
you,
near
Joe from Family Guy.
Wait, yeah, Joe from Family Guy. Are you that guy who's near Turning Point's booth? Who always hangs out near Turning? You're the guy from Turning Point's booth, aren't you?
Wait, is this the right eating itself? Am I watching that in action?
Yeah, you kind of remind. If not, yeah, you kind of remind me of that guy from Turning Point's booth who always hangs around them.
20 Points booth, John Wilkes booth.
Yeah,
He killed Abraham Lincoln.
He killed Abraham Lincoln. You believe that? That guy killed him.
Well, what if Abraham Lincoln is still alive even today?
Maybe Abraham Lincoln is. Who's this kid, man? Who's this guy?
Where's that noise coming from?
Oh my gosh, this is gonna be a mess.
What the hell?
Yeah.
Oh no.
Stop.
Alexa, play that R. Kelly shit.
I want to hear some R. Kelly shit.
Why is your quality so bad?
She's coming on a pineapple, dude.
Okay, some real crackpot shit. I actually think it's kind of racist that R. Kelly went to jail.
Wait, I agree completely.
What? I don't follow.
Well, like, why the fuck can Jeffrey Epstein molest kids for like 30 years?
He's disgusting.
Can I tell you guys what I think? I think this is something that's happened often. I think every positive black role model has been put in jail. You have O.J. Simpson. You have Bill Cosby.
O.J. Simpson.
O.J. Simpson is a black model.
I mean, for all of Obama's faults, he's that's like the president is like a pretty.
Obama can beatbox.
Sure.
Thank you, Dustin Scume.
Yeah, the president it doesn't matter who's president, Obama or whoever. Like who really is at the president? Or
George W. Bush caused 9/11.
I mean,
well, duh.
Spin facts.
Yes, the planes weren't even real.
And also, yeah. Remember, jet fuel doesn't burn hot enough to melt steel.
It doesn't burn the steel beams.
And they had dynamite in the building.
Steel beams.
Yeah, they found dynamite in the building,
Okay,
or even when it crashed into the Pentagon.
Okay, if we're gonna do truth or conversation, can we at least invite someone from the ASU 9/11 Truther Club? And
wait, there's a 9/11 Truther Club?
What?
Yes.
How did I not know about this?
Because they're focused on their work and not showing up into Zoom calls with Joe from Family Guy pictures.
Hi guys, sorry. I know I've been like muted and not on video, but I had to listen and like do other stuff at the same time. So there used to be a 9/11 Truther Club.
Oh.
I knew all the people. I knew all the people a part of it and like, hung out with them and stuff. It's dead now. The organization on campus has been dead for like
that's sad.
A year or two.
We need to return to tradition.
And I don't know what happened to them. I don't know what the members are doing or are not doing, but
they're dead.
It's dead on campus.
They killed them.
So whatever. But yeah, they don't exist anymore. At least on campus. Off campus, I have no idea.
Yeah. Well, it's very suspicious, that whole thing surrounding it, not getting into too much, but then it's like, then that was essentially what triggered these forever wars, as they call them.
Yeah.
But we're in Iraq, and the people supposedly, if you believe the actual story, the official story, the people who did it were from Saudi Arabia, not Iraq, who attacked us. So it's a bit suspicious there too.
And it was racism toward Middle Eastern people, and it created, it inflated hatred towards Muslims in the country, that didn't really deserve that, so.
Yeah. Well, it's the thing, it's like your average Muslim person who you're going to meet, they're not bad people. I'm not saying anything against them.
Unlike the Bush family.
Yeah, I'm not well, Bush family, that's a whole nother thing. You look at judge individuals as individuals, right? There are some people who are bad, there are some people who are good. It's just like with anything else. The people your average Muslim who you're going to meet, they're not bad people. Who it is it's the people who are, like these ringleaders. And you might know of the
George Bush Senior.
Well,
But
yeah,
don't
George
you think
Bush Senior.
us
But then,
invading their country is going to cause hatred toward America when they witness their families being killed and all their institutions being ruined based on being, invaded by a foreign nation and witnessing abuse from soldiers and all of that? Like, I understand your sentiment, and obviously the Islamic practices that are used in Middle Eastern countries seem weird and not, they seem wrong to us, but at the same time, who are we to destabilize that and say this is the right way to live, and it just causes unlimited fighting, and it makes those countries dependent on us forever. So.
Well, then again, that's the other thing. How I was talking in the chat about this is kind of like how I tend to side more with obviously. Rick, how he says, get in there, do what you have to do, but then get out, right?
Yeah,
but
unfortunately, no one wants to get out when they're making money.
But that's not, exactly.
Yeah, and that's why we get in there, is to make
That's not
money.
what we're
So
doing, right? And fighting these forever wars, it's like, why are we, doing this? And, when our own people are dying, young people who, like I said earlier, have good intentions, but it's like over wars for mainly in Iran, in this case, oil, going back since the...
And drugs.
There's
poppy fields that our soldiers were harvesting. They're selling drugs.
In Iraq,
that's the French connection.
In Iraq, they have like the most thriving opium industry over there. I think is it Iraq or one of those Middle Eastern countries?
You're referring to Afghanistan, yeah.
Afghanistan, yeah. Afghanistan, they have one of the most thriving opium industries in the world. So that's one way how we make a lot of money through, like Nina said, drugs, but then also like we said, through profiting off of these destabilizations and stuff like that, which it's absolutely awful. But then that's one thing I have a problem with the mainstream right about this, especially people like Brett Stevens, for example, who justify this sort of thing of us doing all this kind of stuff, which I believe, like I said, it's only caused hatred towards the US and furthered the sort of I don't want to say, stereotype, but it's like how people think that Americans think they know best, which that's not the case. I mean, most people, I'm saying I don't agree with this whole invasion that we're doing right now. But like I said before, your average, most people in the military, who enlist, they're going with good intentions. It's just, it's our government that's profiting off of this.
Yeah.
Oh.
Hello.
Someone joined in.
Anyone can say something.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
I'm gonna cum in your mouth so much you'll be shitting cum.
Wait, what?
Oh, thank you, Colin Powell.
Oh my gosh.
Is that it sounds?
I don't know what that was.
Is that an Antifa?
I think.
Definitely not.
I think this is the right eating itself, sir.
I don't think there's Antifa in this chat.
Rose, you're banned. Leave the Zoom.
I thought this was.
Rose, I literally have a restraining order against you, basically. So please go away.
Don't get into details. I've removed her. We're good now.
Yeah, well, you're safe. It's over Zoom, so yeah, you're fine. But yeah, that's one. This is one other thing. What's currently going on? Yeah, this whole pandemic going to what's currently going on. It's right now where we're at. We're not in a situation where it's all like, oh my gosh, we're there's panic in the streets. This is mild. Like your grocery stores are still open, your gas stations, all that kind of stuff, even restaurants, surprisingly, of all things. I mean, takeout, of course, but still, this is relatively mild compared to like what could happen, like riots in the streets, people breaking into your homes, trying to kill you, stealing, looting, all that kind of stuff.
Well, yeah, the problem is our supply lines are heavily globalized, right? So, for example, dock workers whose sanitary procedures aren't really being followed in San Francisco, they're organizing right now because, if that supply line shuts down, we lose all of our manufacturing bases from overseas, from Asia. And the same thing with the agricultural industry in California, where we grow a lot of our food. I mean, if those people get sick because they're not being taken care of, I mean, we're pretty fucked. We're going to have food riots. There's going to be, the grocery stores will not be restocking, right?
Like right now what they're doing, it's not as severe, it's in the early stages, but they're limiting the amount of people who come in and out of the grocery stores right now. I just went to my local grocery store nearby here. Yeah, they're limiting how much you actually can buy, obviously, but then also how many people can be in the stores at any given time. And then later on, I mean, I'm sure it's going to be just chaos. It's already
might be a bunch of fucking niggers or something.
Not appropriate. I removed them.
Sorry about that, guys. I don't know who that was.
Trying to make us look bad, like we're rabid racists or something.
Yeah.
I'm not the one recording the Zoom meeting, buddy.
Inappropriate stuff like that. Sorry.
Yeah. So back to all that. Yeah. And I mean, you see those, photo videos of Italy, for example. You can go on, Instagram, Facebook, even Snapchat, whatever, of people, posting how, they're singing on their balconies and stuff like that. Well, when they did that here in America, they were like, shut up. And it's like, okay,
because that's cringe. Who can sing on the balconies is whack.
It's like but that's the other problem. It's like there is no sense of unity in America. There, like other countries where you have like a community of people, even in your own neighborhood and stuff like that.
Big.
Yeah, but even even so in your like own individual small communities, because I mean the country's so big, people usually tend to have their own neighborhoods and stuff like that where they kind of know each other, whatever, but not anymore. You see a very, very much like a division where nobody can relate to their neighbors and stuff like that, where a good quote I heard was what was it quote? Somebody asked, it's like, what is one song every American knows how to sing? Maybe Happy Birthday.
Baby Got Back.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really
that one Chainsmokers song that was really popular like in 2014.
Yeah. But yeah, how many people actually know that? A lot of it is like you do see very much a sense of lack of unity here, and what's going to happen next. People are going to start rioting, people are going to start doing worse. And I think honestly, maybe pessimistic a little bit, that we're probably going to be done with after this, because it's like we've been going in a pretty bad direction recently, especially
we need to be done with America. We've kind of moved past the point for that one. Just hasn't worked out.
So I personally think America going to exist in like 40 years, at like probably become balkanized, meaning that we're going to have countries within our country. I see that happening. I don't know how that is happening, but I don't think we can exist as the country we are now. I think beyond any point.
Oh no, obviously, me and you, we kind of know about this. Yeah, Yugoslavia is a great example that how it disbanded immediately with years of inner fighting, stuff like that. You are seeing already a balkanization of America and somehow it's considered racist, for example, that people should assimilate and be unified as Americans.
What are we assimilating on the basis of, buddy?
There's no common American culture. America's not a nation. There's no singular American culture.
That's the thing, though, is that how they say from many one, right? Which not going to get into the whole philosophy of that because that's complicated in and of itself, but people don't know their neighbors. People don't know, that kind what I'm saying is, I can't think of one time really, in my experience at least. You do see very much kind of like a thing where people don't really care too much about each other. It's kind of like, okay, whatever, you get out of here. I'm just like,
But that's part of the, I'm going to be devil's advocate for a bit, but that's kind of part of the American thing is this rap individualism.
Yeah,
And,
I'm not saying like you can't have individualism, but in some sense you do need to be able to kind of relate to your own,
of course, no, I agree with it.
to other people who are also Americans. That's partially, well, that is one of the biggest reason why you might know in Rwanda in the 90s, when the Hutus, and was it the Hutus or Tutsis who slaughtered the other? Because
it was the Hutus that it was Hutu nationalists that perpetuated genocide against the Tutsi ethnic minority in the Rwandan genocide.
Yeah, exactly. So that's one thing also, because they had a tribalistic sort of they had a tribalistic sort of national ethnic divisions within their, like you said, the majorities versus the minority, right? Whereas if they were united as one country, they wouldn't have necessarily had that kind of genocide. But because that's one of the
Sorry to interrupt. Rose, you have a no contact order with Nina. We're taking video of this whole conversation. You do know that, right?
Shit just got real.
Hello, Jackpot. Please do your meme and leave respectfully.
Do my meme and leave respectfully, huh?
Sorry about that. Continue.
Yeah. So Brooke Deering, said it great. Civic nationalism cuts ethnic boundaries. Exactly. What it does is it unifies people regardless, of race or ethnicity or whatever, stuff like that. If we have that sort of sense of, okay, we're American people, and you saw that partially a little bit the last time, mainly after 9/11, where America had kind of like maybe 6 months or so of kind of uniting together. We're Americans.
Well, I don't think like the American Muslim community, despite their American citizenship, felt very civic national in that 6-month period.
No.
Yeah. Well, that's just one point. Just work with me here. I realize, it's not a. I know. I realize that it's not like perfect example, but it illustrates my point. When you're united as one people, there's much less conflict and there's much less tensions between other people. But then there are other issues we get into that, like for example, can you really do that necessarily when you're when there is no reason for you to kind of do that? And that's what I think is causing a lot of this balkanization in America, for example.
We've essentially highlighted that it's impossible for any sort of nation of people, which is usually united through a common identity of marginalization or struggle. You can't form a nation of people without some sort of common struggle. And so you can try to create an artificial struggle by oppressing some other people, but that only works insofar as you feel as though you're benefiting from the oppression of others. Which,
Well,
going off of what Daniel said, how can Native Americans identify with the United States conquered their ancestors?
Wait, what? Wait a second.
Another
Michael Shockley, please do your meme and leave.
And no, that's like that's something.
It's just another spammer. Just ignore him. I removed him.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. No police around here. Yeah. So yeah. Who was it? Who was it last time we were speaking? Was it you, Holden?
Well, I guess there were a few things I wanted to say. Was that what was I think? Oh, right. I mean, it's hard for a lot of people to identify with this country for like Native Americans for existence. I mean, their ancestors suffered genocide at the hands of the United States. And now they're supposed to identify with this country. I could go on about different groups, like, and a lot of white Americans, their families didn't even immigrate to this country until the 19th century after the American Revolution and all of that, so it's, the whole origin story of America, of these English people, mostly English people, who came, and then, they established a democracy, and, had the revolution and all the national myth of the United States. It really, only a small amount of Americans are actually descended from the original Anglo settlers that came here in the 17th century. And, not to mention all the groups I mentioned, like Native Americans, whose ancestors had to defend their lands against the United States Army, and, Black Americans who were enslaved were allowed to be enslaved by the United States for many years, and things like that. So, how can you build an identity around this? And the other thing I wanted to say was about Yugoslavia. Yugoslavia tried civic nationalism existed from, I think it was 1918 to 1991. And it worked out for a while, until eventually the different groups of Yugoslavia realized that they had too much different to be united into one country. So I guess civic nationalism, it can't work out when certain groups feel left out, or that's not all the groups in a country are getting along.
Yeah, and I have my own sort of stance on that, which is that, like they say, the First Amendment, right? Freedom of assembly, right? Like I'm saying, I believe in. I've even mentioned this before. As Julie wrote to me before, I want to be, obviously optical, so I have to be very careful how I kind of speak like this. If I could talk with you about this maybe a bit more in depth. I don't want to do it for.
I was just returning the call that was on.
Yeah, did you block him, Julie?
Yeah, I got him.
Yeah, okay. So the way I have to say this, I have to be very careful how I speak, how I say what I'm going to say next.
Bro, just say it. I'm not recording. You can just be racist. It's fine.
Yeah, no, I'm not talking. It's nothing to do with racism or anything like that. But the way I'm saying that is, I believe in freedom of association. If people, whoever you want to associate with, fine. That's not my business. If you want to, go live in this area with few people or a lot of people, that's fine. Whatever. But that is. I get what you're saying. Yeah, like enslavement, for example. Well, yeah, that's largely one of the reasons, at least partially, I would say. It's obviously more complicated. Why in the 1920s, for example, the Ottoman Empire fell, for example, because, my people, for example, and a lot of others in the Balkans were enslaved by the Ottoman Empire for 400 years, suffered.
Hey, at least we can agree the Ottoman Empire really sucked.
Yeah, I'm not disagreeing with that. Yeah, but that's another thing also that I have other thoughts on that also, that you and I could discuss it another time. We're not gonna do it here because this is got to be a bit optical. So I get what you're saying. Yeah, kind of so what you're saying, I'm getting at, is that yes, there are various other people groups in America, right? And so there is a sort of, and even you mentioned Yugoslavia, there are differences. There were different people trying to share the same territory, and essentially it was very difficult, and eventually it collapsed because you can't have necessarily people who are unlike each other trying to share the same territory. That's what I'm kind of getting what you're saying a little bit. Is that, would you say that's accurate?
Well, I'm saying that if you're going to have different peoples united into one country, then there needs to be equal rights for everyone, and there should not be significant socioeconomic disparities between the different groups in a country. It should be a union that is free, provides freedom and equality to all of its peoples, and is not unfair. And I feel like the United States has historically favored, WASPs, white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, over the different people groups of America. And I feel like that is the problem with U.S. civic nationalism, is it has historically revolved around one group. Most of the
I'm not denying that. Yeah, certainly that's 100% true. Just look at a great example of this. It's just a fact. Just look at the first, what's the word? The first Immigration and Naturalization Act, for example. Who was intended to come to America. It's just a fact. Yeah, that how our first immigration policy was mainly reserved for European countries. Yeah, I'm not denying that. But I would say in another sense, like currently what is going on is, this country, I mean, we have, how many people do we bring in per year? Like, I think it's like 1 million people per year that are coming into America, and all of a sudden you see a lot more of a demographic shift, obviously. But I would say, I mean, just a lot of people on the left, for example, will talk about inequality. For example, I've heard back when I was still in high school that a girl said that minority people, specifically women and people of color, I think she said, or she might have said specific, I don't know who it was, what exactly she said, are less likely to make as much money as men or white people. And then I'm thinking to myself, but what about Asian people who make more money than white people on average? Or what about individuals?
Wait, do you know where that is though? Because we have incredibly rich like immigrants from Asia that come over to America, and it skews the numbers really heavily. The median numbers for Asian immigrants are also like first generation Asian immigrants. If you tie like their economic status in their home country to like their economic status here, the numbers are about the same.
Yeah, but then even just look at, other places like Black communities. You can't deny, for example, in Africa, not Africa, in Black communities right now, you have for example, 70, I think it's like 70% out of wedlock rate or something like that. Obviously, that's a big issue when it comes to Head Start in life. That's not
like alternatively, like Nigerian immigrants, for example, are some of the wealthiest and most educated immigrants to the United States, right?
That's the thing.
It's like when you group large groups of people together by Asian or African, it doesn't really.
There's a lot of differences. Yeah, and I totally agree with you guys. I just think there's a few differences. Like personally, what I think America should do, or I think we should prioritize people in other, like let's say somebody is from an African country and they're a doctor and they want to come to America. I think instead of allowing them to come here, where they have to start from scratch, and maybe they'll make a lot of money for their family. I think we should support them in their home country so they can build hospitals, and they can, instead of having some Americans going there to help them, why don't we have people from that country help their own and encourage people who are doctors or are highly intelligent in those countries, instead of incentivizing them to move here, excluding refugees and situations like that, but situations where somebody just wants a better life. I think that especially Africa, I think us helping them in their country so they can grow. That's what I'm more of a proponent
but the problem with that is that like brain drain, I guess, where like educated people leave their home countries isn't really like held up, because educated people are a result of systems that exist within countries, right? Like Cuba makes good doctors. Good doctors don't make the Cuban healthcare system, right? So you have a country that produces good doctors, good engineers, good lawyers, they leave, whatever, the country will just make more generally. The countries that
not necessarily in these countries, that especially in Africa, who are incredibly poor, and they're not having, because they don't have the resources or they don't have the same institutions like America does. So if you want to become a doctor in America, okay, you go to elementary school, middle school, high school, you go to college, get a loan, go to medical school, all that process is set up for you. Somewhere in Africa, they don't really have it. You have to have connections to maybe other countries, or your family there is very wealthy. So that's kind of how I say, I think we should incentivize them to stay in their own country and help their own people.
But helping those countries like build infrastructure, like for example, medical schools, right? So that you don't have to have connections or go overseas to get an education, would be vastly more beneficial to those countries than any sort of immigration policy. Because again, getting one doctor, even 100 doctors or 1,000 doctors to stay in a country, I mean, that's not going to create more doctors. Those people aren't going to become educators necessarily. They're not going to build hospitals.
But they're going to help their own people in countries where medical, doctors or whatever is limited. You know what I mean? Like having those resources there. Who's talking?
The phone
Julie,
number.
we might have to block
Someone
another
interrupting.
person.
Sorry, I'm kind of multitasking.
Yeah, no.
Thank you, Julie.
No, who is interrupting?
181-683.
Yeah.
Remove. Okay, continue.
Oh yeah, but like for example, one additional doctor or any number of additional doctors in Nigeria staying there, they'd be helpful. But again, they don't even have the tools or resources to be helpful.
And I think we should build those tools. And
for example, in like Thomas Sankara, he, I think, very famously rejected U.S. aid, and because the U.S. wanted to send food aid, I believe. and he said if you wanted to send us something, send agricultural tools, send
It
hoes,
was
send plows.
foreign aid.
Yeah,
and that's what.
So that's essentially, you know, if people want to come here, I mean, it has no bearing on whether or not a country is going to develop its industry or its material resources.
Yeah, and that's the other thing also. When you look at it, just look at it. This is partially why I have a problem with us giving. Well, before I say this, massive foreign aid to any country, but like look at Africa, for example. Like you said, resources, for example, Africa has quite a bit of really great natural resources. Like for example, there was you can easily look this up. I think South Africa, for example, is like the number 2, for example, exporter of platinum or something like that. Botswana, other places, they have amazing amounts of copper, for example, or uranium, stuff like that. Natural resources, that's just one example. You can look up Africa, literally sits on a gold mine of resources. But then also, that's partially the reason why I have a problem with us giving, you know, $4 billion per year to Israel, for example, when they have one of the best, for example, technological sectors.
Socialized healthcare and education.
Do you fucking realize it's 2:30 in the morning, you asshole?
Oh my God, where did this link go? That we're getting all
It's 7:51.
Go fuck yourself, nigger.
Okay, anybody else? Anybody else?
How are people getting into here?
I
What the
do
hell?
not know.
It's like
Just some advice. You guys might want to do like DM for the link.
Oh, maybe.
I don't know though.
Also, you can set the room.
We're getting invaded. Okay, I'm just calling it the
I
invasion of this
enjoy having these conversations with people from many different walks of
You
life,
can-
but I don't
you can-
appreciate the people who just bust in and start screaming.
You can set the link to invite only, so only the links you create.
Oh, maybe that's what. Okay.
It's a Zoom
Gotta try
setting.
next time.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Can I comment on the thing about resources that was said earlier? Was I feel the main reason is that you're right. Africa is extremely rich in resources, and especially natural resources.
Yeah.
But you know, they aren't able to use them. You know, they should be very rich, but they aren't. And I feel like one of the chief reasons because of that is imperialism. You know, I feel like that's one of the reasons they aren't able to use their resources effectively, is because I think a lot of the resources have been looted, and to this day they're subject to neo-colonial control from you know, institutions like the French Republic, the IMF, and the Global Bank, or World Bank.
Yeah, the problem I see with that, for example, is look at India, for example. In India, they've had almost 100 years of imperialism from Britain, for example, yet they come over to America. They're one of the fastest growing countries in the world, development wise. And when they come here in America, you know, you see a lot of, you know, very successful people from India, for example, you know, IT programmers. That's why we hire so many of them from, you know, in parts, you know, parts of India, stuff like that. They're some of the best programmers. So then by that standard, India should be one of the poorest countries in the world, but it's becoming more rich today. Or what about other countries, for example, that have also dealt with really, really bad things in life? That's one of the biggest issues that I have with that. And that's why I also reject a lot of what the, I guess you could call, the alt-right, I guess you could say, says. I think that I think it's ridiculous for us, for example, white people, to blame Jews for their problems. Why? So, and as well as I think it's dumb for you to say that white people are to blame for African colonization, for example. You might not know of what's his name, Jared Taylor, for example. When he was younger, he traveled to Ivory Coast and then to Liberia, and he said, and they used to call Liberia like the France of the Middle East. It was really rich people. It was one of the richest countries in Europe, in Africa at the time. And then he went to
nigger.
What?
Who was
Yeah.
Danny?
Who are these people?
Thank you, Danny Duncan.
Yeah.
I lost
So,
the meeting,
yeah.
so I don't know why he waited this long to say that, but okay.
Okay, that's
And so that's what, and that,
on
yeah.
here. And
That's
the,
one other thing. What was I saying? Yeah, he said, and he went to Liberia. Jared Taylor went to Liberia after he went to the Ivory Coast, and then he asked a local local college student. He's like, why is your country, so much less developed than, say, Ivory Coast? And the African student from Liberia said to him, that's an easy question, because we didn't have the benefits of colonization. His words, not mine.
I mean, that's pretty cringe, bro.
His words, not mine.
Yeah, because Liberia, one of the reasons Liberia is poor is because they have actually still endured many civil wars and decades of corrupt leadership. So even if they didn't have to deal with colonialism, they still had to deal with a variety of other things that hurt them as a country. And the Ivory Coast, or it's actually called La Côte d'Ivoire.
Like, I agree colonization can have some benefits. Like, for example, if, America goes and colonizes a country and builds them a bunch of railroads and a bunch of water salination plants, and those people take up arms and kick out America, now they have a bunch of railroads and water salination plants, right? But I mean, otherwise, if they don't control the infrastructure, I mean, there's no benefits to colonization. You're just a worker. You're just a guy getting a salary just like anyone else.
Yeah, and then Holden, if his mic, if you can hear. Yeah, you can hear. Okay. Yeah. So yeah, you can hear. Yeah, you can. Yeah.
The Ivory Coast isn't really that rich either. It's still one of the poorest countries in the world, and it's I'm not sure where it stands with regards to other countries in West Africa, but I mean, it's not a very good performing country. A lot of the country there still lives in poverty, and it's actually where most of the world's chocolate comes from just two countries, which is just most of the world's chocolate comes from just two countries, which is Ghana and the Ivory Coast. Sorry. Most of the world's chocolate comes just from the Ivory Coast and Ghana. However, a lot of the chocolate farmers there, they have never even tasted chocolate in their life. I saw a video of that, and that in itself is just emblematic of how unfairly they're treated. They make most of the world's chocolate, but they only get 2% of the world's chocolate profits.
Yeah, well, they're obviously multifaceted. I'm not talking about one thing versus another. There are obviously many reasons why some countries are rich, some countries are poor. Even if you look at Hoover Institute, when they talked with Thomas Sowell, he's like, when the guy asked him how is wealth created, and then he's like, do we have about 3 months or years to talk about this? So it's obviously a very complex topic, but it's just one of many reasons. For example, you mentioned even corruption, for example. Yeah, corruption, obviously that's a big issue. That's part of the reason why, for example, in a lot of Eastern European countries, they have very little development. For example, if you go to Greece is just one great example of that, where their currency, I think, for example, was what's something with their economy collapsed completely. Shouldn't have lost their currency because they're in the European Union, but yeah, it's another topic altogether. There are obviously reasons why other countries are developed versus another, but yeah, it's much more nuanced than just like how we're talking.
Some countries have lions, other countries don't have lions. Just saying. I mean, pretty consistent for development purposes.
Cool.
I thought lions were extinct.
No,
not yet. Go watch the Tiger King.
Oh my
true.
gosh.
Don't even get me started on Tiger King.
You ain't that straight.
All right, well, 2 minutes, so I guess.
Well, I've appreciated this meeting of the Red Brown Alliance, everyone. It's been great.
I would think you're more left leaning, right?
Yes, I'm the red and the brown.
Okay.
What?
Yeah. Well.
Okay.
Sorry, I wasn't to or even listen to the discussion. I've been dealing with other things and playing.
Rose is dealing with CPS stuff, so God bless her.
Yeah, and Holden, you're on. Yeah, well, you're obviously. I could tell you're much more left leaning. But yeah, at least we could, you know, have a reasonable conversation, unlike other people who will just call you a Nazi or white supremacist or whatever and just shut you down.
Yeah, well, everyone was very educated, I think, on our discussion, and I think, you know, we all were able to agree on something. So, very Dave Rubin moment, very civil marketplace of ideas here. So I really appreciate everyone. I don't know what your club is called. Are you like the Democratic Socialist or something? I don't know what your name. Not trying to disrespect.
Oh,
I don't know
Students
what
for Socialism. Not the Democratic Socialists. Different guys.
So you're not part of the socialist group, are you, Daniel?
Oh, no, I'm a communist. Students for Socialism.
So you're
on campus.
you are a communist.
Yeah,
Students for Socialism, not Democratic Socialists.
Club, Stefan, that are at ESU. So I really appreciate. Obviously, I didn't know you guys were going to be here until like minutes before, but I really am glad you were, even though I had my little scrap presentation, whether you guys liked it or not. I'll listen, and I appreciate that. And we had a little conversation here that I think we all enjoyed. So I really appreciate it. I apologize for the spam. Again, I don't know. The link could have been shared from multiple people and it goes down the line. So I'm sorry about that. Again, it wasn't anyone I knew personally. I don't even know who they were. So I do apologize for that. Next time we'll lock the meeting and more secure. I don't really know how to use Zoom. It's like the first time I really used it for a significant period of time.
Yeah.
Good
Conversation here, not debate, Brooke.
All right.
Yeah, again, this is not like prepared. Nobody prepared. Besides me, I prepared my Martin Shrkeli presentation, but we weren't really talking about that.
Well, I'm gonna go, and I'm pretty sure when I go, it shuts it down for everyone. So I wasn't able to listen to the conversation that much, but I didn't hear screaming and loud voices, so I'm guessing it went well. Yeah. So see y'all later.
Thank you all.
Bye.